Good afternoon, everyone. I am Agnes He, Director of the Center for Multilingual and Intercultural Communication at Stony Brook University. I am delighted again to welcome everyone to the second workshop in our workshop series on language and social justice. Our research center is dedicated to addressing fundamental questions regarding the role language plays in shaping identities, communities, and cultures. And one of our core missions is to create synergy between research, practice, and education, and to inform the public of the means and meanings of respecting and promoting multilingualism. So this workshop series then is a result from dedicated efforts by the center's affiliated faculty members in response to recent social justice movements nationwide. This workshop series is co-sponsored by the Center for Changing Systems of Power, the Institute of Globalization Studies, as well as the School of Professional Development. Our workshop facilitators today are Dr. Laura Lisabeth and Dr. Sharma. Dr. Lisabeth is a lecturer in the program in writing and rhetoric. Her research focuses on standard English ideologies, the history of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style, and how the publishing industry and popular periodicals of the 20th century have shaped current understandings of literacy. Dr. Sharma is associate professor and a graduate program director, also in the program in writing and rhetoric. His scholarship and teaching focused on language policy and politics in writing education, writing in the disciplines, professional communication, cross-cultural rhetoric, and international students and international education. So I now give the floor to Dr. Lisabeth and Dr. Sharma.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. A quick outline. We have designed this workshop with 3 simple steps, thinking about how this community of teachers and students could make small but significant changes by paying attention to language and language dynamics. The first activity is about how we react to language difference, including what may be learner errors, variations from the dominant variety, or even a second or third language used by another person. In this case, our students, as well as the classroom, the teacher in the classroom environment. The second activity will ask us to reflect on some of the normalized reactions by deliberately noticing and talking about how we and others react to language difference and diversity. We will begin to talk about the issue of justice with the second activity. In the first one, we would like you to more candidly respond to language difference as it is responded to, usually. The third activity will ask you to review one of your own classroom activities, assignments, or maybe a syllabus in light of what you have found useful in the first and second activity. We'll give you some time to jot down notes, planning how you might update or create a new task, assignment, or syllabus policy in order to apply what we talk about in the first 2 activities in your own classroom. Laura will get us started with the reaction, the first step.
So we're all going to go a little deeper into the issue of language and justice later, but this first little moment that we're going to start with is that just to address a practical question. How do we use assessment in ways that recognize the variety of objectives, challenges, and opportunities of language use in the classroom? Take a few minutes, if you will, to read the student writing that you see on the screen. This is an example of I call it an Instagram essay, in which students are asked to combine visual and textual resources to write about something significant to them. My objective with this assignment is to capitalize on students' own knowledge and experience as a way of engaging with each other on social media as a mode of practicing and learning writing and language. I also like to do this at the beginning of the semester to give students a chance to share their most casual uses of language, to get to know each other outside what can often be the identity constraints of formal academic linguistic performance. Students can write 100 to 200 words, but the focus is simply on all the language and social media resources they feel moved to combine. So what we'd like you to do is to just take a look at it and give it a grade out of 10 points. Hopefully you can now see the poll on your screen, and you can actually, we'll sort of take a read of the room and see if everybody can grade the writing. It's anonymous.
So can I ask, we're grading this based on based on it as a writing assignment?
Yeah, I gave you some context for the writing assignment, and we just kind of wanted to get sort of I guess a gut feeling, you know, from your teacher perspective, how you would respond to this writing. It looks like the largest percentage of people gave it a 7. If there's someone who would like to share their process in grading it and talk a little bit about the score that you gave the writing.
Why did you give the grade you gave? What was your reaction? Leslie, I think you have a hand, and Megan.
I think she wrote it really, he or she wrote it with a lot of description, and to me it was very heartfelt, very much coming from a memory from her heart. Just because the grammar wasn't correct, I couldn't give it a bad grade because the grammar was bad. Because weren't we told that it was supposed to be written in an Instagram sort of a way, like social media?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Did anybody else have any thoughts about what were your feelings about reading this student's writing?
I gave it a 5. I was kind of very torn because of the richness of the text, all this wonderful information, and you can understand what she's saying. The message got through, but you know exactly what she's talking about. So there's no question about that. But if our purpose is to like try to help her write it more clearly or in a more standardized way, then I could not give it more than a 5.
Okay. All right. Anybody else would like to share?
There's a 1. Should we hear from 1? It'll be nice.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, let's hear that and then move on maybe.
I don't have a 1. I see a 2.
Oh, it's a 2, I think. Oh, yeah. 2 and then 5. Let's share some high marks and low marks. Let us be candid. That's the whole point.
I was the one who gave it 2 because I had no idea what the actual question was. I apologize.
But give us a sense of why you thought the student needs to do better work on this one.
Well, I didn't understand what the context was. I thought that this was an actual assignment that they were handing in to a teacher, but you were just using that as a proxy for that assignment.
Good point. Go on. If you
No, that's all. The grammar was not particularly well done, though you understood what they were trying to say. The grammar just wasn't there, and it was very hard to read. And if I was an employer, that would look really bad if I had an assignment that you had to give me, and I had to do that. It was not efficient.
Other colleagues, any response to that? Or maybe you have a high point that contrasts with what I think you're a student, right?
Yes, sir.
He's saying.
I gave it an 8 because I thought 7 was a little low. Like Leslie started, I thought it was very heartfelt, and I could completely understand what she was trying to, or he was trying to convey. And I just was thinking like A, B, C, D, E, F, I just thought, well, and I was just completely making it up as I went along, but I'm thinking, is this the beginning of a semester? And this gives me the opportunity to work with that student. So that's where my head was at. But I was somewhere between a 7 and an 8.
Just to shift gears toward the second activity, everybody. We'd like to share with you just a few ideas from the scholarship on multilingual and translingual writing as a point of reference for the next reflection activity. These concepts may be basic for many of you, especially in the linguistics department and the writing department, but cognizant of the audience diversity, and to set a little bit of conceptual context, shared context that is, we'd like to take a few minutes to share a few juicy quotations from some recent research on translanguaging and translingual writing. The first is from Ofelia Garcia. As those of you who joined us last week heard from our colleagues, Joy and Paco, Garcia, one of the key scholars who has popularized the practice, especially in K-12 context in the United States, provides us with a good definition of translanguaging. Quote, translanguaging refers to the discourse practice of bilinguals as well as to pedagogical practices of teachers who teach them that use the entire complex linguistic repertoire of bilingual students flexibly in order to teach rigorous content and develop language, unquote. By the way, this is a quotation from a work Garcia wrote with Angel Lin, and in that work, they also they give us a little bit of a historical context about translingualism. Mainly discussing the Welsh origin of the discourse on translingualism, Garcia and Lin point out that translingualism, contrary to the fears of language interference, so that you have to use only one language if you want to help students to improve that language, is actually a powerful linguistic tool set for students to learn and communicate ideas as well as develop languages. In other words, fostering all languages helps any language involved. So what the Welsh scholars noticed was that their students were actually benefiting in the learning of English as well as learning of social studies and science and math if they were able to mobilize all languages. And from that very basic premise, scholars like Garcia have, and Kanagaraja and Li Wei, Lu and Horner have been advancing the discourse and practice of translingual writing, Laura. The second quote, as you can see on the screen, is from Li Wei, a scholar who was here in Stony Brook a few years ago. Agnes, you had invited him for a special lecture in the MIC. Wei takes the idea of translanguaging a step further to remind us that we all have the translingual instinct, even if we do not use multiple languages, to mobilize all linguistic resources we have at our disposal. Those linguistic resources may be within the language, dialects, idiolects, language variations, slang, colloquial or versions of the same word, registers from different parts of the country, different generations, men and women. It says that it, quote, drives humans to go beyond narrowly defined linguistic cues and transcend culturally defined language boundaries to achieve effective communication, unquote. Meaning that whether we are monolingual or multilingual, we're inclined to transcend and settle across language varieties and language borders of named languages and language within the languages, mix and mesh resources, adapt to others and adopt others' ways of communicating, and so on. So you will notice that if you go to a new place, you start speaking British English, you start speaking German English. It's very natural. We have that instinct. So building from the instinct out, Wei opens up a pathway for us to engage all students, monolingual and multilingual. Even when the society doesn't allow us to learn more than one language, or we didn't get an opportunity, translingual instinct, the instinct to transcend language varieties and language borders, even within the borders of the named language, is what he's talking about. So as Garcia has called this, translingual stance or translingual disposition. And they've written extensively about this stance, this disposition, this instinct. And we'd like to introduce that another juicy quotation. Laura, can you see the screen now for Kanagaraja?
I have my notes back and
good.
I'm back. Okay, so have we talked about Kanagaraja's quote yet?
We're about to, yes, go ahead.
So Kanagaraja introduces the ideological nature of all languaging, including standard written English. In fact, we might We might add that this is the most political of all linguistic animals in the world, so we should not deny that it is. And that acknowledgement opens many doors to language awareness and languaging possibilities. Kanagaraja says that standard written English, this is a quote from up top, cannot be treated as a monolith, masking the diversity that is already there in written discourse.
Yeah. No act of communication is free of values, he says. The universality of standard written English or written language in general is also a language ideology, similar to the orientation of texts as being self-standing and devoid of meaning negotiations. Who is making that argument matters, right? Standard written English cannot be treated as a monolith, as Laura said. So that's the context. And finally, the final concept we want to share here is from Bruce Horner and Minjian Liu, who take translanguaging into the domain of writing and rhetoric and composition, who bring up the issue of agency in ways that also allow the multilingual students to exercise monolingual standard variety of English if they like, as well as monolingual students who may be doing the same. They say that, quote, a translingual perspective in teaching would involve engaging students in exploring what they care to advance about the people, the language, and the culture with which they are identified and may identify, and how and why and when to do it. Meaning, you can mobilize the standard English's own languaging possibilities as you exercise your agency through it, even if you are a multilingual student. And that's a fascinating perspective, one that I begin to wonder if I fully agree with. But the possibilities of multilingualism, translingual writing are many, many, many. And in a moment, we will show you, some resources. But before we do that and go into the second activity, let us show you a 3-minute video in which 3 main benefits and tips, tricks of translingual possibilities in the classroom are shown in a 5th grade classroom.
Currently, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite books, and I think it's a great book to teach this population of students. And one of my favorite quotes from this book is, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and walk around in it. And I think that's what it's all about. I think as a middle school teacher, it's all about empathy.
Welcome back to Teaching Bilinguals, even if you're not one. I'm Sarah Vogel, a research assistant with the CUNY New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals. Today, I'm here at Ebbets Field Middle School, an exceptionally diverse school in Brooklyn, New York. On any given day, you can hear students speaking Haitian Creole, English, Spanish, Arabic, and 2 dialects of Fulani. Miss Shireen Chapman-Santiago is an 8th grade English teacher here, and she truly lives by that philosophy from To Kill a Mockingbird, that you have to know students well in order to teach them. But how can you truly crawl into your students' skin if you don't share their language practices? In this episode, we're going to find out how she does it.
I think the quote really inspires me to dive deep and understand who the student is, and not just, a name on a roster, but who is that person, and build a relationship.
Let's get into Miss Chapman-Santiago's tips for building relationships with her bilingual students. Tip 1. Miss Chapman-Santiago is a keen observer of her students' expressions and behavior.
First and foremost, cues. Body language. When you give them something and they're just like, they delve into it, or they kind of just like look around. So I always look at those things. I feel like I'm a mother first, right? So I'm very in tune to their emotions because they are teenagers and they're very dramatic. And so when they come in with that face, I'm not going to continue with the lesson. I'll direct the students to do something and I'll pull them out in the hall and have a conversation. If we don't speak the same language, I'll pull out my phone, I'll type the question, give it to them, they'll respond. And I've literally had conversations like that and uncovered some really deep and personal things that actually helped me deal with the students accordingly.
Tip 2. When it comes to academics, Ms. Chapman-Santiago provides opportunities for students to show what they know using home language practices. That way, she can see their strengths and their challenges.
The starting points vary from child to child. So even if you have 3 kids from Yemen, one may have had like some very advanced education, some may not because they're from the rural part. Those that are more proficient have an easier time making the transition from their language to English, while those maybe with formerly interrupted education, may need more interventions. I don't know the languages of the room, but I look at their work and I can infer where they are and modify accordingly. If I gave her the prompt in Arabic and she only wrote 2 lines, then I start wondering, is she proficient in Arabic? And then I'll compare it to her counterpart who'll have a full page. And then I'm like, maybe I'll need to give her a little sentence starter or a little bit more background. In the beginning of the year, January, she started out with just 2 lines.
And then what do we see kind of later in the year with your supports? Sort of writing
so she's writing more in Arabic, but it's half a page now. And then she's now attempting to write in English. And even though it's 2 lines, it's a victory for me. But today's entry was awesome. Where is it? It says, I wear my hijab. I don't know what that says. With my Islamic clothes, which makes me glamorous. And I was like, yes, you are glamorous.
Tip 3. Based on her observations, Ms. Chapman-Santiago creates scaffolds that draw on students' home language practices. Students who are literate in home languages benefit from translated copies of texts and prompts, like this exit slip. While students complete this assignment, they can talk to a partner using whatever language they'd like to ensure they understand what's being asked of them. In the end, they must answer the question in English so Ms. Chapman can see how they progress on specific language objectives.
Google Translate is always open. And then where I can't, I have students also help. And I'll send things home to like older sisters or mom, parents for feedback. And is this right? But it is a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of work, but it's necessary if you want everybody to succeed.
To recap, Ms. Chapman-Santiago uses clues beyond language to help her understand her students. She makes careful inferences from students' home language practices, even if she doesn't always understand what they say or write. Ms. Chapman-Santiago welcomes all kinds of language expression in her class and provides resources in home languages to students who she knows will benefit from them.
Okay, so basically she uses cues, allows different languages, and she scaffolds by using different languages. To move on, Laura?
Okay, so we have some questions now for you to reflect on. To give you the task for this second activity, which is a discussion, we've posed a few questions. So whether you want to draw on some of the concepts we just shared or connect these questions to your own practice, jot down some notes about, first, how can we let students use their different languages and varieties, as well as help them language productively in the classroom and in the world. The term languaging, by the way, is used to describe the dynamic ways in which people use language or get things done with language. How can we be more like that teacher we just saw? Second question is, along the same lines, how can we focus on language as a means and not always a goal to learning, to doing things, to connecting, to inventing? Maybe you have a great idea about how to use language. We often focus on the form at the expense of student motivation, ignoring what the learning objective of the assignment is, whether we've taught what we're testing or are rather judging students on and so on. So how can we focus on the many other things that language is doing in the classroom other than being learned? Perhaps you could see this in my assignment from the first activity. And the third question, finally, if you'd like to skip our questions and talk about anything drawn from your own teaching, learning, or interest, or if you want to build on our first 2 questions, what are some of the areas of reflection about language vis-a-vis linguistic racism and other issues of justice in the context of broader goals of education? We'd like to start connecting language with language justice. So maybe you could bring that into this reflection activity too. We're going to send, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And because we want to send you to small breakout rooms now for discussion, deeper discussion, we have copied these questions to Google Doc, where each group can take notes. Anybody would like to share some of the thoughts and ideas and even questions?
Well, let me open my document. I want to thank Laura Donna for writing these things down, because I did not. And our group was really interesting. Anyway, so one of the things we talked about is awareness of where those students are coming from, to answer the first question. knowing, like, not looking at all of them in a monolith, like these are students, but if, take into account sort of what their background is. We each have different types of experience, whether I teach Latin, and I also teach translation. Elizabeth teaches business at the grad level. So we have different types of students, and sort of understanding sort of where they're coming from, what level they are, but also, and yes, Rose is in Peru teaching English to people in Peru. So we all had like very different experiences, and some of the issues between like Elizabeth and I, not issues, but like the fact that I teach a language and then she's teaching other different kinds of content. So Rose and I are both teaching a language, and Loredana as well. But then, Elizabeth is teaching a different content, but there's still language involved. Considering psychological factors is something that we talked about, and using, being creative about materials. So for instance, Rose uses Dungeons and Dragons as a way and as a Discord group for her students to learn English, and through gamification, which is, I know, something in my own field is a burgeoning field within it, like, gaming the educational system.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Okay. Just wanted to remind you of the time. If you could take about a minute, everybody, please. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was trying to remind you the time.
Oh, it's okay if you want me to stop here, or.
Oh, yeah, finish the thought though.
Oh no, just using different games I think would be helpful. I mean, and it would take me too long probably to get to the second and third ones.
So I'll jump in here. For our group, we discussed for number 2, the idea of giving an authentic task, and so as the end goal, and using language as a means to get that. So in my group, we discussed, someone was a substitute teacher who deals with E&L students frequently. I've been teaching English for 15 years. And we discussed maybe if the task in mind at the end, whether it's writing a resume or the learning something that you might be required to help family members translate, if that's the goal, not just rote vocabulary memorization, it might make for a more authentic experience. And it can also give you and the students the opportunity to kind of share a cultural moment if you have a discussion about, is this a similar task that you do from your native country, or for where, or what are the similarities and differences?
Thank you. Colleagues, please just unmute yourself and talk. We'd like to hear as many voices as we can.
Okay, I can go now if there's no one else talking. So the person in my group was a teacher of Chinese, and I'm a teacher of English, and she was talking about how she teaches to adults. So she presents the article, the content. If they're unfamiliar with the content, she presents an article in English because they're all English speakers, and then they focus on specific vocabulary for translation, or translate specific vocabulary in that particular topic in Chinese, and then express their views in Chinese. But we were also talking about sort of the disparity between the ideologies that exist in teaching English versus teaching other languages. When English speakers learn other languages, it's perfectly acceptable to go from English to the other language in that classroom, versus in an English learning classroom, it seems to be unacceptable, or at least that's how I was trained initially, to speak any other languages but English in that classroom. So it's an English only zone. I'm done.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if Paula and I think we might have gone rogue and not answered the questions, but our conversation was really fruitful. And we talked, Paula talked about time and how it's really important and, productive to give students time to think about a question. So, distributing a question ahead of time so that students can process and really not feel anxious or worried about participating, because doing so would help students become feel more confident to participate in a conversation. And so that was, I think that was a great point. And I love that. And I think I sort of, raised a question which Sam has previewed and said Laura has an answer for me. So I'm looking forward to that. But the point of how sometimes we're working at cross purposes, doing something like that is sort of at cross purposes to some of the things that we're compelled to do in the institution in terms of assessment, like even the question about grading, assessment, and you've got this weeks of the semester. And so, we can feel the pressure. So that's a challenge. And that's all I'll say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me share.
Yeah.
Can I go? Okay. Okay, let me share what we discussed in our group. So we talk about how we can help a student encourage use their body languages, like in the video, right? We were so impressed by that video too. And facial expression, eye contact, and speaking in their own native language. So we let them do that. Also allow students to speak in their languages in a large group. And I think Radha, right, she wrote about requesting a volunteer or translator, interpreter to make the information accessible to all. So first we need to make it accessible. Also as a writing teacher, I think that designing assignment to help students to come up with their own ideas is, I think my time is up, right? Thank you.
So in my group, we had 2 science teachers and a music teacher. And our discussion on question number 2 was around how we got these students to show that they learned the content. How can we tell that they learned the content? And so for us, the focus is really on communication. So if they can communicate in a way, it doesn't have to be standard English, but that we can somehow understand, that is enough. But on the same time, we were debating on what's our responsibility to make sure that that student also learns to share and express that scientific idea or musical idea in English, because they are here. And they will eventually, we assume that they will have to eventually express those things in English if they, want to stay in the country and get a job and go on with their careers here. So.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. I'd like to hear from all the rooms out there.
Hi, so I could share from our room. I thought that we had a really good discussion, and we talked about a lot of different things. And one of the things that we talked about was equipping students with what they needed to talk to each other, right? So if they happen to, if students in the class happen to have limited English proficiency, but their native language is a different language, right? And so then sort of, they would be utilizing what English they have, right? Of course, because that's going to be their shared language. And then you want to be able to equip them as much as possible to use their native languages, because that's going to be really important. But we also talked about giving them sort of skills where they can act things out, right? And sort of, use body language and things like that, and using pictures, and how pictures can sort of almost act as this universal sort of communication and such, in order to give students of different language backgrounds the tools that they need to be able to help each other, like even without English, and sort of equipping students with those skills as they're kind of going through the classroom, right? Because then you're able to, even in mixed groups, allow them to sort of tap into their native languages, and they can maybe be using their native languages and such, but still have a communication tool that they can all use with one another, and then therefore still be having that sort of collaborative learning process as well. So my colleagues brought that up, and I wanted to bring it forward because I just thought it was a really wonderful thing to do.
Thank you. Maybe 1 more? We have time for 1 more maybe, and we'll move on.
I can just summarize for our group really quickly. We sort of came from the cultural perspective of teachers of the other, and not just students, the assumptions we make, using jargon, using words that maybe to advance Also assuming that all students have the same cultural experiences. And when we provide assignments, we assume that they all understand the same cultural assignments and so on. And so it's more of a self-awareness of teachers.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back here. Let me share the screen again. Let's move on. The third activity.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to share, before we go into the third activity, a sample of the many possibilities of translingual activities, translingual assignments, translingual environment, translingual policy, translingual disposition, stance, translingual kindness, I would say, so that the classroom is able to mobilize and exploit the resources of many languages and cultures. Even if you cannot do that in the product of writing, you could do that in the process of writing, right? And so here's a statement that I wrote for my own class, and I put it in my syllabus. Now let me read it out, just as an example of something we could do to foster that environment of respect for all languages, cultures, and epistemologies. I write, the ability to use different languages and or varieties of English is a very useful skill in society. It is recognized as such and promoted in this course. I encourage you to choose and use any Englishes, including standard written English and other languages and varieties, along with the rhetorical, cultural, and epistemological resources they provide you or they give access to. In the process of any assignment, so I emphasize process, you can draw on the resources of other languages and varieties, even when the final product must be in standard English, which you will work on as part of this course's official learning objectives, which is the required mandated objective in the case of my department. I don't know about others, but I don't use it as an excuse to prohibit or discourage languaging, dynamic languaging in the process. In the broader scheme of education, we will learn and help each other to consider rhetorical factors such as context, audience, medium, and purpose of communication. I call it the CAMP, camp, of communication when we choose and use different languages and varieties and resources in effective ways. I add this note because I want us to foster respect for and promote all languages and cultures, as well as identities and value systems. So by simply making that clear and talking about it the first day of class, I open the door to possibilities, even when the final product must be in English, even when students want to focus on the standard English, I don't close the doors. So that's just an example. We are now going to share a resource page on the side, but as we take you to the third activity, in which, Laura, where you want us to take, you want to take us there?
Sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, so for this third activity, we're going to give you a full 20 minutes, I think. Do we still have that going?
Maybe 15.
Okay, so we're going to change it to 15. We'd like you to work in groups of 3, so you have more time to discuss. Before we open the rooms, however, this time, we would like you to actually write up a classroom activity or an assignment or a teaching strategy that involves language diversity, translanguaging, translingual disposition, the ideology of standard written English, issues of language justice, any ways to mitigate bias any ways to mitigate bias or to create an environment of greater respect for different languages and the different cultures and epistemologies that they are conduits for, and so on. Just to trigger some thoughts and ideas, let us show you some examples that Shyam and I put together.
I put that in the Google Doc. It's a new Google Doc, and please feel free to add your own notes, thoughts there. This time we only have one Google Doc, but if you would like to use the same Google Doc from the earlier group, feel free to do so. But the idea is to develop your own activity, just on an offline note, your own assignment, your own teaching strategy, your own syllabus idea. How are we going to foster more dynamic languaging, more respectful environment, and so on, as we have talked about so far. And when you come back, we'll ask you in the final 10 minutes to share within 1 minute each what your teaching activity, assignment, strategy, policy is. I guess it's best to use about 5 minutes to actually write and then to send everybody to the room, maybe 3 minutes. We'll do that, 3 minutes. Develop your own.
Okay, so now that you're back, let's see if we could share. We'd love to hear what you were talking about in your breakout room. So, who would like to begin sharing? Are people still coming back in? Maybe.
I think everybody's back here.
I'll volunteer. I'll speak.
Great.
Go ahead.
So I was with Professor Morelli and Professor DeRiestal, and I've never taught, but they both came from different fields. Professor Morelli is a music professor, and Professor Riestal teaches Latin, and she's also teaching mythology and whatnot. But they both introduced ideas that I feel like would be very inclusive for students who have different linguistic backgrounds, given what they're teaching. So for Professor Morelli, he proposed, or he's discussed how he encourages students to bring in music from their own cultures into, I think he was speaking about a lecture that they give on music for his classes. And then Professor DeRiestal also spoke about if there are comparable mythologies or tales from their respective cultures to accentuate the similarities while also embracing the differences.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Another colleague.
Did we hear from someone else?
I'll just share real quickly now. And Aaron in our group came up with a good suggestion of sharing recipes and discussing even the techniques and terms for methods of cooking, stewing, and frying, and even naming of spices. But then, different traditional meals that can be made. And I thought that was a great idea. It sounded like a lot of fun, and how there may be subtle differences. And I'm thinking how, you have 10 students from different parts of Latin America, and each one of them have different rice and beans, and they'll swear to you that they're different. So I thought that was a great idea from Aaron.
Wow, thank you. A few more. Kathleen, I kind of stopped you earlier because of time limit. If you'd like to build on, connect, if you're still here.
No, I think I'm okay. I think other people have mentioned it already.
Other colleagues?
Sure. In our group, it wasn't more of an activity. We just had more of a discussion, and we all kind of had similar experiences with language, and sometimes like the making sure to be inclusive in our language and making mistakes. And we kind of just discussed how the students appreciate if the acknowledgement that maybe we aren't using the right terminology, and what is the right terminology to use when referring to different groups of people, and just how the value in that, and how recognizing and acknowledging, is this the right word to use? Is this the right term to refer to this group of people? It validates where they're from, and it shows that as educators that we are aware of where they're coming from, and to try to show them respect for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I can talk. Hello.
Yeah.
I can talk about what I was talking with Professor Son, who teaches Korean language and also content course in Korean culture. And because language courses are very different from content courses, so different strategies will be used. For language courses, maybe it's a good idea to differentiate the time when students are asked to use only the target language. Doesn't matter whether it's just 3 minutes or 5 minutes, let them try out. And for the rest of the time, let them mix different languages so that they can communicate better, understand better. But for content courses, it's slightly different. And maybe we can allow students to bring out different ideas using different languages, different terms in different languages, but ask them to explain so that other people can understand. This way we can learn more like a rich content. And also I was thinking about context like primary schools. For example, we can pair,
anyway,
we can pair them up and then ask them to find out what kind of word she or he uses the most at home and learn it and try to use it at your own home. So this kind of activity can be like a starting point.
Thank you.
To understand the context.
So because we're almost running out of time and we have 2 more things to do. Laura?
Are we going to go back to that original assignment or are we going to move on?
Yeah, 2 things. One is like, how does all this relate to the original challenge that we had of reacting to language error and language variation? Maybe some colleagues who have been thinking about that and who have thought about it differently in the course of the conversation can share. Or maybe Laura, you want to say something, or maybe Agnes, you want to share something? How can we go back to that original, the reaction that we have to language difference and language variation?
So can we go back and look at Sholin's?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Let me share that screen. We have 1 minute for that, and 1 minute I'm going to ask Agnes to tell us about the next workshop.
Okay, so let's just revisit this now after everything you've talked about. Is there anything that you think differently now about Sholin's Instagram essay?
Because no one is speaking, can I say just one thing, Laura? I think if your objective is not to teach language, please do not reward or punish language. If the objective is expression, connection, community, confidence, identity, culture, epistemology, focus on those. There is a dictum in the philosophy of assessment, so the educational philosophy of assessment, that says, if you didn't teach, do not test. If the learning objective is not correcting language, do not correct language all the time, at the cost of, at the expense of confidence, respect, and learning. If you take the approach used by that teacher earlier, it means that if the objective is not to correct, you should probably not be correcting. And this obsession with correctness must be let go.
Thank you, Shyam.
I will share this document. We shared a short reading list. We shared the sample syllabus we shared earlier. Then there's a bunch of translanguaging activities, assignment pedagogies. I hope that you will continue to please share. And there's a longer translingual reading list, but that is here. Where is it? Where is it? Here. www.tinyurl.com/translingualsbu. And if we could continue to build on that document, that would be wonderful. Agnes, next workshop.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let us thank our facilitators today for doing a very difficult but a wonderful job overcoming all the difficulties, including technical difficulties. So let's give them a big hand. Thank you for doing this for us. Our workshop series has 3 parts. The first one that some of you attended concerns language and ideology on a macro level. Today, we have focused on writing and the kinds of things that we respond to, and then the basis we have considered some of the multilingual dimensions along which we need to be thinking about our writing assessment. So Friday next week, we're going to move on to speech, communication, oral communication in the classroom, particularly with a focus on participation opportunities. And we would like to consider how we can best support our students who come from language backgrounds that are not standard American English. So we look forward to seeing all of you next week, and please help us spread the word. Invite your colleagues, students, join us, right? Thank you for spending this Friday afternoon with us. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.